With all the talk recently suggesting that the swap of Taliban prisoners for Bo Bergdahl could be grounds for impeachment, Andy McCarthy's book, Faithless Execution, Building the Political Case for Obama's Impeachment, was released with pretty much perfect timing. Here to discuss this and other ways the administration has usurped its constitutional authority is Andy McCarthy. Andy, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
The book, obviously, the timing is great. A lot of people have brought up this constitutional case against Obama here in relation to the Bo Bergdahl thing, and we should get to that in a second, but I think your book really makes the case that that's not even necessary.
Well, no, it's not, although, you know, the problem with writing a book about lawlessness in the Obama administration is that the writer has to stop writing at some point, whereas the administration keeps rolling along. But it was almost inevitable, given the pace that they're at, that we'd have some instance of lawlessness that didn't get covered in the book. This, I think, actually plays right into what I'm trying to get at, although I have to say I think what Washington has spun up about, to me, is trivial compared to what I see as the more important impeachable offenses that have been committed.
Right. People are basically talking about this 30-day warning period. Right. And there's more to that law than that, but I mean, it doesn't seem like that's really the highlight here. I mean, because the president has pretty broad powers when it comes to these things, don't they? Yeah,
he does. And I'd say two things about it, though. He's got an argument that he has that the statute breaches his or improperly restricts his constitutional authority. You can go back and forth, and people have gone back and forth about that. What I would say is more important than the content of the statute is a year ago he had Carney get up in front of the press and the country and say they'd comply with the statute and they'd consult with Congress before any of these Taliban guys went back. And to the framers, the president had a fiduciary responsibility to be straight with the Congress and the public. You know, if he really has a good faith constitutional problem, he can have that, but he needs to be straight about it. Instead, he lulls them into a false sense of security by saying he's going to do one thing, and then when the time comes, he does the other. And far more important than that, you have him, the commander-in-chief, with force protection being one of his most important duties, returning to the enemy in wartime while the enemy is still shooting at our men and women in the field and trying to blow them up. 5 of their most experienced, most capable, most implacably anti-American commanders. It's about as shocking a dereliction of duty you can get, short of, say, not at all coming to the rescue of people in Benghazi when he knew they were under terrorist siege.
Yeah, so when you're trying to build a case like this, because this is not just necessarily just a legal case. There's more to it than that. Right. It's obviously a lot of politics involved as well. How does this case get built, and could it be built in real terms?
Well, you know, there's 2 aspects to it. The legal case, I think, is very straightforward. The framers gave us a very clear standard for removal of a president, which is high crimes and misdemeanors, other than treason and bribery. And what they meant by that is not common crimes and misdemeanors. Hamilton called it the political offenses of public men. They're profound breaches of fiduciary duty. They're much more redolent of the military justice ideas of dereliction of duty, failure to comply with an oath. And what the framers were most concerned about was misconduct, whether it was corruption or incompetence, that threatened the governing framework, especially the separation of powers. So I think when you have down what they meant by that standard, the fact that we have many high crimes and misdemeanors over 5.5 years is pretty straightforward. You have failures to enforce the law, failures to execute the law faithfully, massive fraud, abuse of process, the list goes on. And I lay out in the second half of the book, much the way a prosecutor would plead an indictment, what articles of impeachment would actually look like. I plead 7 of them in the articles. Yeah. So that's the legal aspect of it. But the framers also wanted impeachment to be difficult. They knew it would be very disruptive to the society. So that's why they put in this 2/3 requirement in the Senate. You have to have 2/3 of the Senate vote to impeach before you can remove the president. And that was to make sure that it couldn't be a product of partisan hackery or factionalism. They wanted a broad cross-section of the public convinced that the president should be removed. So, bottom line is you can have 1,000 provable impeachable offenses, but if there's not a strong public will that the president needs to be removed from power, impeachment becomes a non-starter. So the upshot of the book is we have to make the case on lawlessness, why it's important, why it threatens our liberties, and the fact that the Constitution only has a couple of ways to really deal with lawlessness: the power of the purse and impeachment. And if they're not going to use the power of the purse, this is what we're down to.
Okay. We have about 30 seconds left here. And I think the book makes a strong case that this is provable. Politically, obviously, it's going to be difficult to get over this hump. As you mentioned, 67 senators, very difficult. But at this point, now that we've gone through an election, he's got a couple of years left, would it even be a positive? I mean, certainly, just from the perspective of then what, we get Joe Biden, and then he is in office to try to run for re-election, sort of? And
well, look, remember, you'd get a very different Joe Biden. You'd get a Biden chastened by the fact that the country had been outraged enough that they got Democrats to vote to impeach Obama. So, so that's one thing. But, I think the burden here is not so much to impeach Obama. The best thing for the country would be to create an environment where he felt that he had to enforce the law faithfully. I know that's difficult to do, but what I'm hoping to do is change the political environment. And it's little old me. I don't expect I'll be able to do it myself. But I do think that you got to get the lawlessness part right and out into the public domain and stress to people why it's so important. You can't even get to impeachment until you convince people that presidential lawlessness is a big deal. And I actually think it's a political winner for the president's opposition.
Yeah, well, if nothing else, you have to have people aware of the stuff that he's doing, and that's certainly in here. Faithless Execution, Building the Political Case for Obama's Impeachment. Andy McCarthy, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. All right, well, what